On the brink of annihilation, humanity faced impossible odds, outnumbered, outgunned, and with no hope in sight. But one daring plan turned the solar system into a battlefield and transformed desperation into a legendary victory. With raw ingenuity, relentless courage, and a touch of chaos, this is the story of how an Earth engineer's bold idea became the galaxy's worst nightmare. Written by the Outnumbered team, it's a journey of resilience, brilliance, and sheer determination. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride. Dr. Ethan Voss stood at the edge of the observation deck, staring at the holographic projection of Earth's orbit. The serene blue sphere was surrounded by chaos, a swarm of red markers representing the Zixorian Dominion's fleet closing in. Each marker was a death sentence, a ship armed with weapons that could reduce entire continents to rubble. The Earth Defense Council, EDC, meeting behind him, was anything but serene. The room was alive with bickering generals, politicians, and scientists, all shouting over each other about how to handle the impending invasion. Ethan rubbed his temples, his patience stretched thin. "This isn't a battle," he muttered to himself. "It's a slaughter." On the flagship of the Zixorian Dominion, Commander Calix reclined in his command chair, a smug grin plastered across his reptilian face. "Humans are primitive creatures," he said, addressing his officers. "Their fleet is little more than a collection of outdated scrap. By this time tomorrow, Earth will be ours." The room rumbled with approving growls. The Zixorians had crushed countless civilizations before. Earth was just another backwater to subjugate, a footnote in their growing empire. Back on Earth, the meeting reached a boiling point. "Our fleets are already stretched to the breaking point," Admiral Rossi said, slamming his fist on the table. "We can't hold off their firepower. We need reinforcements." "Reinforcements?" Ethan finally spoke, his calm voice cutting through the noise. "From where?" "Mars, Venus. There's no one left to call." The room fell silent. Ethan stepped forward, gesturing at the holographic projection. "We've been fighting them head-on, and it's not working. They have superior technology, firepower, and numbers. But they're not invincible. They're overconfident, and that's their weakness." "What's your point, Doctor?" Rossi asked, his tone sharp. Ethan took a deep breath. "We can't outgun them. So, let's outsmart them. We have an entire solar system full of untapped potential. Let's weaponize the asteroids in the belt." The room erupted into chaos. "Are you insane?" one general shouted. "Do you know how unpredictable that is?" "We'd be turning our own solar system into a war zone," another chimed in. Ethan raised his hands. "It's already a war zone. This is the best shot we have. Weaponized asteroids are cheap, devastating, and impossible to counter if we play our cards right." Hours later, Ethan found himself in a dark corner of the observation deck, nursing a lukewarm coffee. The EDC hadn't outright rejected his plan, but they weren't rushing to support it either. "You really think this asteroid idea can work?" a gruff voice said behind him. Ethan turned to see Commander Marcus Steele, leader of Earth's last operational defense fleet. The man was a war hero, scarred from years of battle, but his tone carried a hint of curiosity instead of skepticism. "I do," Ethan said. "We can retrofit propulsion systems onto existing asteroids, guide them with precision toward their targets. One impact could take out an entire Zixorian carrier." Marcus folded his arms. "You'll need help. Engineers, resources, time." Ethan smiled grimly. "Time is the one thing we don't have." Marcus nodded. "But you've got me. Let's make those rocks fly." Within days, Ethan's asteroid weaponization program was underway. The asteroid belt became a hive of activity as miners, engineers, and rogue factions rallied to retrofit propulsion systems and targeting arrays onto massive chunks of rock. The work was grueling, dangerous, and untested. Every failure felt like a personal blow to Ethan, but the team persevered. "This one's ready," Diego Alvarez, a grizzled asteroid miner, said, patting the surface of a massive rock. "If this baby hits, it'll light up the galaxy." Ethan nodded, his confidence growing. Let's hope the Zaxorians like surprises. As the first wave of weaponized asteroids was prepared for launch, the Zaxorian fleet closed in on Earth's orbit. On their flagship, Commander Calix watched with amusement as human resistance crumbled. "Futile," he hissed. "Their desperation is almost entertaining." On the asteroid belt, Ethan and Marcus stood side by side, staring at the fleet's holographic projection. "This is it," Marcus said. "They're coming." Ethan nodded, his hand hovering over the launch controls. "Let's give them something to remember." He pressed the button. The asteroid belt hummed with activity, a symphony of chaos orchestrated by desperation. Makeshift bases were hastily constructed on the larger asteroids, where teams of engineers and miners worked day and night. Chunks of rock the size of small cities were retrofitted with propulsion systems, rudimentary guidance modules, and layers of reinforced plating. Ethan Voss paced along the edge of a command platform on one of the largest asteroids, his eyes darting between the monitors, showing real-time progress. Propulsion systems were firing in test bursts, and targeting arrays flickered with life. The progress was remarkable, but the clock was ticking. "This is insane, Ethan," Diego Alvarez said, wiping sweat from his brow. He leaned against the rough surface of an asteroid, a welding torch dangling from his hand. "You're asking us to turn rocks into missiles in a week. We need months." Ethan glanced at him. "If we had months, Diego, we wouldn't be having this conversation." He gestured at the holographic display floating above them, showing the Zaxorian fleet inching closer to Earth. "They're not going to wait for us to get everything perfect." Diego sighed, shaking his head. Yeah. Just remember, when this thing works, I want my name on the first plaque." Ethan smirked. "Deal. Now get that propulsion system calibrated." Meanwhile, back on Earth, the EDC watched the asteroid program with a mixture of skepticism and unease. The idea of weaponizing the solar system's natural resources wasn't just unconventional, it was reckless. Admiral Rossi, now forced to cooperate, appeared on the holographic link. His face was etched with doubt. "Dr. Voss, do you have any idea what will happen if one of those asteroids veers off course and heads toward Earth?" "I do," Ethan replied, his tone calm but firm. "But the alternative is letting the Zaxorians burn Earth to the ground. If you've got a better plan, Admiral, I'm all ears." Rossi's lips thinned, but he said nothing. "Thought so," Ethan said, turning back to his team. Aboard the flagship of the Zaxorian fleet, Commander Calix watched the Earth forces with detached amusement. The humans were scrambling like insects, their pathetic fleet no match for the Dominion's firepower. "Pathetic," Calix muttered, his reptilian claws tapping against the armrest of his chair. "They cling to their planet like children clutching a toy. It will be satisfying to crush their spirit." An officer approached, bowing slightly. "Commander, our scouts have detected unusual activity in the asteroid belt. The humans appear to be mobilizing resources there." Calix raised a brow, his lip curling in a sneer. "Let them. They're wasting their energy on pointless theatrics. Rocks cannot harm us." He waved a dismissive claw. "Prepare the fleet for the final assault." "Systems check complete," Ethan said, standing in the makeshift control room atop one of the asteroids. The room was a patchwork of scavenged tech and hastily assembled interfaces, but it worked. Marcus Steele, the grizzled fleet commander, stood beside him. "You really think this is going to work?" Ethan looked at him, his expression serious. "It has to." Diego's voice crackled over the comms. "First asteroid's propulsion system is online, ready to fire on your command." Ethan hesitated for a fraction of a second, his finger hovering over the launch control. "Here we go," he muttered, pressing the button. The asteroid shuddered, its propulsion system roaring to life. Slowly, it began to move, accelerating out of the belt and toward the Zaxorian fleet. "First wave is away," Ethan said, exhaling. "Now we wait." On the flagship, alarms blared as the asteroid appeared on their sensors. Calix leaned forward, his amber eyes narrowing. "What is this?" he growled. "A large object is approaching, Commander," an officer reported, Trajectory suggests it's an asteroid. An asteroid? Calix repeated, his tone dripping with disdain. Do they think debris will stop us? Ignore it. Focus on the fleet. The asteroid continued its relentless path, unnoticed by most of the fleet. When it struck one of the Dominion's carriers, the results were catastrophic. The kinetic energy unleashed by the impact tore through the ship, splitting it in two. Explosions rippled outward, and smaller vessels were caught in the blast radius. The command deck of the flagship shook as reports flooded in. "Commander, we've lost the Aegis and 3 frigates," an officer shouted. Calix's claws dug into the armrest. "What? How?" "The asteroid, Commander. It was weaponized." Ethan watched the impact from the control room, the display lighting up with the results. The Zixorian fleet was in chaos, ships scrambling to regroup. "It worked," Ethan whispered, almost in disbelief. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "Damn right it did. Now let's send them some more." Diego's voice came over the comms again. "Second wave is prepped and ready. Just say the word." Ethan nodded. "Launch it." Asteroids roared out of the belt, their crude propulsion systems guiding them toward the enemy fleet. The humans had turned the very solar system into a weapon, and the Zixorians were unprepared for the ferocity of the assault. As the second wave of asteroids launched, the Zixorian fleet began to adapt. Their ships spread out, using advanced targeting systems to intercept the incoming projectiles. The humans had the upper hand for now, but Ethan knew it wouldn't last. "We've bought ourselves some time," Marcus said, watching the display, "but they're going to counter us eventually." Ethan nodded grimly. "Then we'd better come up with our next move." The display zoomed out, showing the Zixorian flagship repositioning itself. Its massive cannons began to charge, their glowing energy aimed directly at the asteroid belt. "We're not done yet," Ethan said. "Not by a long shot." The asteroid belt shuddered with activity as the second wave of weaponized asteroids launched toward the advancing Zixorian fleet. Each asteroid was a crude marvel of human ingenuity. Chunks of rock retrofitted with propulsion systems, crude guidance modules, and reinforced plating. What they lacked in finesse, they made up for in sheer destructive power. In the makeshift control room, Ethan Voss stood amidst the hum of scavenged equipment, his eyes fixed on the holographic display showing the trajectories of the projectiles. Each glowing dot represented a rock hurtling toward the enemy fleet at mind-boggling speeds. "Wave 2 is away," Diego's voice crackled over the comms. "We've maxed out propulsion on the last set. Let's see if these ones hit harder." Ethan nodded, his face grim. "If they don't, we're out of options." Aboard the Zixorian flagship, Commander Calix's claws tapped furiously against his chair's armrest as the tactical display lit up with warning signals. The initial asteroid strike had caught them off guard, devastating a section of their fleet. But the humans were no longer an unknown quantity. They were now a threat. "Prepare interceptors," Calix growled, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "Destroy those projectiles before they reach us." A squadron of sleek Zixorian fighters launched from the carrier bays, their thrusters glowing as they raced toward the incoming asteroids. Each fighter was armed with precision lasers, designed to vaporize debris before it could strike the fleet. The first few asteroids exploded in fiery bursts under the laser's barrage. Cheers erupted on the Zixorian command deck as the threat appeared neutralized. "They think this is all we've got," Ethan muttered, watching the display. "Let's show them what Earth engineers are capable of." Ethan's team had anticipated this. The second wave wasn't just a repeat of the first. It was an evolution. The asteroids now carried decoy modules, splitting mid-flight into smaller, faster projectiles. The Zixorian fighters were overwhelmed as their targeting systems struggled to lock onto the new swarm. For every asteroid they destroyed, 2 more slipped past their defenses. The impacts were devastating. Another carrier broke apart, its debris scattering into smaller vessels, while frigates were ripped in half by the kinetic energy of the strikes. In the control room, Marcus Steele grinned. "Look at them scramble. They weren't ready for this." Ethan allowed himself a small smile. "They underestimated us. That's their first mistake. Their second mistake is assuming we're done. Despite the success of the second wave, the Zixorian fleet wasn't out of the fight. The flagship's massive cannons glowed ominously as they charged, sending blasts of energy toward the asteroid belt. Each impact created violent shockwaves, dislodging smaller rocks and threatening the humans' makeshift bases. On one of the asteroid platforms, Diego Alvarez shouted over the comms, "We've got incoming fire. If they hit the propulsion bays, we're toast." Ethan's voice came through, calm but urgent. "Prioritize shielding the launch systems. If we can't launch the next wave, it's over." Miners and engineers scrambled to reinforce critical systems, welding makeshift shields from spare parts. Sparks flew as energy blasts rocked the asteroid, sending debris spinning into the void. "We need to hit them harder," Ethan said, pacing in the control room. "The smaller asteroids are working, but they're not enough to force a retreat." Marcus frowned. "What are you thinking?" Ethan pointed to the holographic display, zooming out to reveal the Kuiper belt. "There's a massive rock out there, a dwarf planet fragment. If we can redirect it, it'll make the last impacts look like firecrackers." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You're talking about moving something the size of a city. We'd need every propulsion module we've got, and there's no guarantee it'll hold together." "I know," Ethan said, "but if we don't try, Earth burns." Marcus nodded. "All right, let's make it happen." As Ethan's team began the risky operation to weaponize the massive fragment, the Zixorian fleet escalated their retaliation. Fighters strafed the asteroid belt, targeting launch platforms and propulsion bays. The humans fought back with improvised railguns, hurling chunks of metal at the attackers. On the flagship, Calix's frustration boiled over. "Enough of this game. Focus all firepower on their central base. Wipe them out." The flagship's main cannon charged, its energy glow visible even from the asteroid belt. In the control room, alarms blared. "They're targeting us," Diego shouted. Ethan clenched his fists. "We need more time. Marcus, get everyone to cover. I'll handle the trajectory on the fragment." "Don't take too long," Marcus said, grabbing a weapon and heading out. "We're running out of people to save you." Ethan worked furiously, his fingers flying over the controls. The massive rock began to shift, its propulsion modules firing in staggered bursts to stabilize its trajectory. On the monitor, the fragment's path updated, angling toward the Zixorian flagship. "Come on," Ethan whispered. "Just a little more." The flagship's cannon fired, sending a blinding beam of energy toward the asteroid belt. It missed the fragment by mere meters, but obliterated a smaller asteroid nearby. The shockwave rocked Ethan's platform, nearly throwing him off his seat. "You're cutting it close," Diego's voice crackled over the comms. "Close is all we've got," Ethan replied. As the massive fragment accelerated toward the Zixorian fleet, the humans watched in tense silence. The holographic display showed the trajectory holding steady, but the flagship began deploying countermeasures, targeted energy blasts aimed at disrupting the propulsion systems. "They're trying to stop it," Marcus said, re-entering the control room, his face grim. "They won't," Ethan said, though his voice betrayed his nerves. "They can't." The fragment loomed larger on the display, its massive shadow casting over the Zixorian fleet. "Impact in 60 seconds, the computer announced. Ethan's knuckles whitened as he gripped the console. "This has to work." The asteroid fragment hurtled through space, an unstoppable mass of rock and steel aimed directly at the heart of the Zixorian fleet. Its propulsion systems flared brilliantly, fighting against the gravitational pull of the massive Zixorian flagship. On board the human command platform, Ethan Voss and his team watched the trajectory holograms intently. 40 seconds to impact, the system's calm voice announced, contrasting with the chaotic energy of the control room. Ethan leaned over the console, sweat dripping down his forehead. "Marcus, tell me our propulsion modules are holding." Marcus Steele stood nearby, monitoring a different terminal. "Holding for now, but the Zixorians are firing everything they've got at it." Aboard the Zixorian flagship, Commander Calix paced furiously. The fragment was now visible through the ship's massive viewport, a looming shadow that dwarfed the smaller vessels in its path. "Fire all batteries," Calix roared, his claws scraping against the control panel. That fragment must not reach us. The fleet's weapons blazed, beams of energy and volleys of plasma converging on the approaching asteroid. Smaller pieces of debris broke off as the strikes hit, but the main mass remained intact. "Impact in 25 seconds, the Zixorian tactical officer reported. Calix's eyes narrowed. "Redirect the interceptors. Ram it if you must." The asteroid belt shook as Zixorian interceptors raced toward the fragment. Their sleek forms weaved through the debris field, aiming to crash into the propulsion modules and destabilize the trajectory. Diego Alvarez's voice crackled over the comms. "We've got interceptors heading for the big one. Ethan, they're going to take out the engines." Ethan's heart pounded. "Marcus, we need cover fire. Anything we've got now." On a nearby asteroid platform, Marcus rallied the few remaining defense teams. Improvised railguns launched chunks of metal and debris toward the interceptors, knocking several out of the sky. But it wasn't enough. "Ethan," Diego's voice came through again, quieter this time. "It's not going to hold. The propulsion systems are taking too much damage." Ethan stared at the display, his mind racing. The fragment was still on course, but its engines were failing under the relentless assault. If it lost power now, the trajectory would falter, and the entire mission would collapse. "I can fix it," Diego said, "but I'll have to go out there." Ethan froze. "Diego, you can't. There's no way you'd make it back in time." "Yeah," Diego replied, a hint of a smile in his voice. "But if I don't, we're all dead anyway. Let me do this." Before Ethan could respond, Diego cut the comms. Diego suited up quickly, his movements precise despite the chaos around him. He stepped into the airlock of his platform, staring out at the massive fragment as it barreled through space. "All right, big guy," he muttered to himself. "Let's keep you moving." Using a small propulsion pack, Diego launched himself toward the asteroid. The cold void of space enveloped him, the distant explosions of the battle a muted backdrop. He reached the propulsion module, welding tools in hand, and began working furiously to stabilize the engines. Zixorian interceptors closed in, their weapons blazing. Diego's comms crackled with warnings, but he didn't stop. Sparks flew as he repaired the damaged systems, his breathing steady despite the looming danger. "Engines are back online," he said, his voice calm. "She's good to go." A second later, a Zixorian interceptor collided with the module, engulfing the area in a bright explosion. In the control room, Ethan's screen flickered as Diego's comm feed went silent. "Diego," Ethan whispered, his fists clenched. "Impact in 5 seconds, the computer announced. The fragment, now fully stabilized, tore through the final line of Zixorian defenses. Smaller ships were crushed or sent spiraling into space as the massive rock plowed forward. On the Zixorian flagship, alarms blared. Calix's face twisted in rage and fear. "All hands, brace for impact." The fragment struck with a cataclysmic force, shattering the flagship's shields and tearing through its hull. The resulting explosion lit up the battlefield, a massive shockwave rippling outward and scattering the remnants of the Zixorian fleet. The humans watched in stunned silence as the holographic display updated. The Zixorian fleet was in disarray, its flagship obliterated, and the remaining ships retreating in chaos. Ethan sat back in his chair, his body numb. "We did it," he said softly. Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder. "No, Diego did it. We just finished it." Ethan nodded, his jaw tightening. "We'll make sure the galaxy knows." The Zixorian fleet fled, leaving Earth victorious, for now. But Ethan's mind was already racing, knowing that humanity's unconventional tactics would soon draw the attention of other galactic powers. "Prepare the next wave of asteroids," he said, his voice steady. "We're not done fighting yet." The story ends with a haunting image. The asteroid belt, now a symbol of humanity's resilience and ingenuity, glowing faintly under the light of the distant sun. The Zixorian flagship was gone, shattered into fragments that drifted lifelessly through the void. The shockwave from the asteroid impact had scattered the remnants of their once imposing fleet. Across the solar system, cheers erupted from human strongholds, from battered military bases to crowded underground bunkers. Ethan Voss stood in the control room on the asteroid platform, his eyes fixed on the holographic display. The battlefield was quieter now, with retreating Zixorian vessels marked in dull red as they fled toward the outer reaches of the system. "We did it," Marcus Steele said, stepping beside him. His voice carried equal parts triumph and exhaustion. Ethan nodded, but his expression remained heavy. "At what cost?" News of Diego Alvarez's sacrifice spread quickly among the asteroid teams. Engineers and miners, many of whom had fought alongside him, paused their celebrations to mourn the loss of one of their own. On the platform, Ethan replayed the comm logs in his mind. Diego's final words echoed like a haunting refrain. "She's good to go." He knew what he was doing, Marcus said, sensing Ethan's thoughts. He made his choice, and because of him, Earth is still standing. Ethan clenched his fists. "It shouldn't have come to this. We need to make sure it never does again." Back on Earth, the remaining members of the Earth Defense Council gathered to address the planet. Admiral Rossi stood at the podium, his once pessimistic tone now brimming with resolve. "Today, humanity has done the impossible. Against a superior enemy, we not only survived, we triumphed. The galaxy underestimated us, but they will never do so again." Cheers erupted across the world as the broadcast reached every corner of the globe. Humanity, long seen as a minor player in the galactic stage, had earned a reputation as a force to be reckoned with. In the weeks following the battle, Ethan and his team worked tirelessly to refine the asteroid weaponization program. With the Zixorian threat temporarily neutralized, humanity turned its focus toward fortifying the solar system. "This can't just be a one-time defense," Ethan said during a meeting with his team. "We need to turn the asteroid belt into a permanent shield. The next time someone thinks they can take Earth, they'll face a wall of firepower they can't get past." The miners, engineers, and soldiers all nodded. They had seen what their ingenuity could accomplish. Now, they were determined to build on that foundation. Across the galaxy, news of the Zixorian defeat spread like wildfire. Species that had once dismissed humanity as insignificant began to view Earth with newfound respect and fear. On a distant world, a council of alien leaders debated the implications of the battle. "They destroyed a fleet with rocks," one alien said, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Not rocks," another corrected. "Weapons. Ingenious, devastating weapons." "They're dangerous," a third said. "We must monitor them carefully." Ethan stood on the observation deck of the asteroid platform, gazing at the distant blue orb of Earth. The solar system felt quieter now, but he knew the peace wouldn't last. Humanity had proven itself, but that proof would inevitably draw more challenges. Marcus joined him, a cup of coffee in hand. "You did good, Voss." "We all did." Ethan smiled faintly. Diego would have loved to see this. Marcus raised his cup. "To Diego, and to the next chapter of human ingenuity." Ethan nodded, his gaze steady. "To humanity. We're just getting started." Above the asteroid belt, a newly launched swarm of weaponized rocks glinted in the sunlight, a silent warning to anyone who dared to underestimate Earth again.